Opposition parties in Parliament say they're frustrated by delays in the potential establishment of a committee that would oversee the affairs of the Presidency. It is the only department that is not overseen by a parliamentary portfolio committee. The African Transformation Movement leader, Vuyo Zungula, joins us tonight from Bloemfontein. A very good evening to you, sir. Grateful for your time. So, for our viewers who've not been following this call that you as the opposition have been advancing through Parliament, let's start with why the establishment of an oversight or parliamentary portfolio committee to look into or look over the Presidency specifically is such a critical thing that is yet to be established.
Thank you, Tembekile. The Constitution mandates Parliament that it must devise mechanisms to scrutinize and oversee all executive actions. Now, by that it means there must be no executive action that is not scrutinized by Parliament. That is why if there is a certain Department of Minerals and Energy, there's a corresponding portfolio committee to oversee that department. If there's a Department of Small Business, there's a corresponding portfolio committee on small business to oversee that department. However, in light of the Presidency, there is no mechanism in which Parliament can scrutinize and oversee the actions of that particular department. And you'll recall that now the Presidency is bloated. There is a Minister of Electricity in the Presidency. There are ministers for the women, youth and persons with disabilities. There's also that unit that dealt with infrastructure that was led by Mr. Ramakgopa. Therefore, in light of those realities, as opposition parties, we've made a call to say there must be a committee that will scrutinize all of the actions of that particular department to make sure that we satisfy ourselves as Parliament that there is indeed no wrongdoing there. All monies are accounted for, and basically that department, which is the Presidency, is operating in line with the policies and the regulations governing our country.
Why are the appearances in Parliament by the President before the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, by the President and the Deputy President, why is that not an effective or sufficient means within which to conduct this sort of scrutiny that you would want to see ultimately?
When you're talking about that question and answer session of either President or Deputy President, it is questions that firstly are limited to 6 questions per session, and it is a maximum of 3 hours, and it is once per quarter. Now, there are so many things that happen during the course of the year, during the course of the month, the week, etc., that cannot wait up until the next question and answer session of the President. And what we're arguing as opposition parties is to say we want to strengthen the oversight mechanisms in light that over and above the question and answer sessions, over and above the written questions, there must be a mechanism whereby the accounting officer, which is the Director General, is able to account to Parliament, is able for MPs to ask them questions based on whatever that might have transpired in that particular department. In that way, there is confidence that there is thorough scrutiny of the actions or of the work that is done in that particular department.
And would you want such a portfolio committee to work exactly as the portfolio committees that overlook the other ministries would do, the other departments? I know that it works differently, for example, when you come to intelligence matters, because you've got issues, for example, that have to be dealt with behind closed doors away from the public, but even the members of the portfolio committee aren't able to speak to what they've seen publicly because of the sensitivity of the detail.
Look, in the nature of the office of the Presidency, there is nothing that warrants that there must be secrecy. The issues that are relating to secrecy or that should be dealt with behind closed doors, those that you have correctly stated that they would belong to state security. But there are other matters that would necessitate, require that Parliament has a portfolio committee that will actually be able to work in the same light as the other portfolio committees. And I want to mention that there is a report that has been done by the Parliamentary Budget Office, whereby they did research as to, based on the vote one of the Presidency, are there amounts there or transactions there that are not accounted for in terms of oversight mechanisms by Parliament. And clearly a gap has been identified, that there's a gap between the vote one transactions or the figures that are there and the corresponding oversight mechanisms in Parliament. So what we're arguing for is that we need a portfolio committee that will therefore bridge that gap so that there is no spending that happens in that department that is not accounted for and that is not scrutinized by the respective portfolio committee in Parliament.
Would this be necessary if there weren't so many ministries and other functions that have been moved into the presidency in recent years?
Look, the increase in terms of what has happened whereby a lot of functions have been moved to the presidency has led to this particular debate to say that, for example, unit of the infrastructure that was led by Mr. Ramaphosa, in terms of Parliament, who does it account to? The issue of the Ministry of Electricity, who does it account to? Therefore, it is in that regard in which the increase has led to this particular debate. However, in the past, you find that members of Parliament did not find it necessary to actually have another portfolio committee that is looking at the presidency because the mechanisms there were sufficient. However, in light of the report I made mention to, the report clearly states that there is evidence that the structures of Parliament and the oversight mechanisms are not sufficient to robustly scrutinize or monitor the work of that particular department. So it is in that regard that we're arguing that the only way to remedy the situation is to have a portfolio committee that will bridge the gap.
The ANC is not sold on the idea. Some say they aren't too clear on what is being proposed here. Others are saying within the party that the mechanisms in place are sufficient. What do you think is the likelihood that what you are proposing, what you're calling for, will actually see the light of day while the ANC holds the majority in Parliament, in the National Assembly?
Firstly, it is very ironic that if you listen to leaders of the ANC, time and time again, they always speak about Zondo recommendations and how those Zondo recommendations need to be implemented. However, this has also come out in that Zondo recommendation to say there needs to be an oversight mechanism on the presidency, simply because in light of the state capture inquiry, Chief Justice Zondo found that state capture may have some elements of state capture, in his view, may have been enabled by the lack of oversight over the presidency. Therefore, to remedy the situation, there needs to be an oversight mechanism over the presidency so that we don't find ourselves in another form of capture in any way. Therefore, it is very ironic and hypocritical of the ANC leaders. On one side, they're advancing the issues of the Zondo recommendations, but when they are put to the test, they reject the very same Zondo recommendations. So we are going to push as much as we can, and we want to put it to the citizens out there that the ANC clearly is refusing any oversight over the presidency, and therefore it is the people that must correct that in the next year's elections. And I want to conclude by saying on this point that oversight and accountability breeds responsibility. When leaders know that they'll be held accountable and there's going to be a proper oversight mechanism over them, they act responsibly. Now, in the context of the ANC using their power to block any oversight mechanism, it is because they do not want to use the powers that have been given by the people responsibly.
Vuyo Zungula, leader of the African Transformation Movement. Good to have your time as always. Thank you.